pursuing a great education, there's some suffering in that path.
Every virtue has a vice.
Why are all the classics the sad ending? That's because they're teaching true principles.
A free society must have a moral and virtuous people.
Pursuing truth and pursuing a deep education in truth.
The ability to heal is within us all.
Gentlemen, welcome to the Formidable Family Man podcast. I'm your host, Greg Denning, and my good friend Gary Arnell is back to have another awesome discussion. This time he and I have been texting a little bit and kind of thinking about this idea, and it's been on my mind, it's been on his mind, and so we'll start there and see where this goes. Gary, it is great to have you back, brother, and I have always appreciated our conversations and your intellect and your vast knowledge of reading and study. And of course, okay, here's the cool, and I shared this in our last podcast too, but I just love this. Like Gary and I would go in and do these epic adventures in rappelling or slot canyons, or we're out, hanging over a cliff, just having the total adventure rush. And yet we're still along the path having these great discussions about life and philosophy. I just love it. Love you, brother, and love what you bring to the world. So reintroduce yourself to the audience, and then let's dive into our topic today.
Awesome. Greg, thanks for having me on. Always love talking to you. It's so much fun. I grew up in Southern California, oldest of 8. Currently live in Southern Utah. My wife and I have 6 kids, and we raised our family in Southern California, then we moved here. And love the outdoors, and so that's one of the main draws to be here in Southern Utah is the Zion National Park, and there's several national parks, Grand Canyon, and so forth. So love getting out there whenever possible. Love that connection there. And so I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm a husband, a father, a student of moral political philosophy, and So
why? Let's go there. Why a student of moral and political philosophy? What drives you?
Jordan Peterson said the truth is the antidote to suffering, and that's why.
Okay, yes, you're right, and I agree. And yet there's so much suffering, even in the pursuit of moral and political philosophy. And this is what we're going to really dive into today, of like pursuing a great education. There's some suffering in that path, and yet you're right. Truth is the antidote. So expound on that a little bit. Let's dive into that.
Well, truth is elusive. There's reality. Reality is things as they are throughout the entire universe. That is the domain of reality. Truth is the description of reality at a given place and time, space, time, wherever. Truth is a description of that reality. Our perception can vary from that truth.
Well, and create our own reality that's very real for us.
And create a false reality or maybe a little sub-reality that may not encompass actual truth. So we can be perceiving incorrectly. We can be perceiving reality and have a corrupt or shifted version of truth that causes suffering. That's one source of suffering. It's not the only, of course, but you have reality, you have truth, you have perception. And so how do we improve our perception? Because perception can be corrupted. Perception can be wrong. Our senses can lie to us. Our eyes can lie to us. Other people can tell us things that aren't true. Other people can be convicted of something they believe to be true, but be in error. And so, if I were to sum up the pursuit of Western civilization and classic liberalism, which is the operating system under which we grew up and now operate, the ideal version of it, which has never actually existed, but which right. That's the study of it, right?
Aspire to.
That's what we aspire to. It's aspirational. The whole point behind it is, how do we create there's always been a problem of power. There's always been individuals who have sought power over their fellow beings to create the reality that they wanted, that they thought that they wanted. Genghis Khan, for example. I don't know if you studied this guy.
Yes.
But 8% of the whole world is descended from Genghis Khan. And there's a reason for that, because he used his power to propagate his genetic code. Not likely that those women that were involved, were consensual in that, but, he used power to roam the vast, plains of Asia
And created one of
and
the greatest and biggest empires that ever
the
existed.
greatest and biggest empires, but not one of great prosperity for all the people involved. It was great for him, but it was a power. It was a matter of power, and that's the story of humankind, right? Of civilization, of history, is people exercising power to coerce others. Not usually benevolent, but sometimes even in benevolent ways, like divine right of kings. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to touch on this a little bit because I get fired up about this, Gary. Because there are a lot of people, and there's some very famous books out there right now that were recently published that this is just the way things are. The pursuit of power. And that the only way you get what you want is you have power. And every interaction with others is to try to exert power over them. And it's like, no, that's not. Just because it's been done doesn't mean it's the way to do it or the only way it can be done. And luckily, it's been cool. Recently, I've heard Jordan Peterson approach that same thing and say that's not the only way. In fact, it's not the best way at all, just to exert power. But you're right, it has been done and is always being done.
Yeah. So classic liberalism. So last time we talked about libro. Liberalism is the study of the free man. How do you have a people be free and govern themselves versus this time-honored tradition of power ruling the people? Yeah. So it's this matter of how do you have power versus freedom? And
freedom is built, like you're saying, must be built on education.
Must be built on education, and truth is the North Star in a freedom-seeking, or a society that wants to run on freedom has to always seeking the truth about what is the best way to raise families, what is the best way to run businesses, what is the best way to run churches, what is the proper role of media, what is the proper role and way to govern. You're always constantly seeking truth. So that's why you have to have freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of the press, because everyone has to be able to argue and debate and try to figure out what is the actual truth to best live by, because we're all in this together as free people trying to figure out the best way to live. Right. Whereas under a power structure, it's really only the powerful people are figuring out the best way for them to live, and the rest of us be darned, Right. And so it's either power or truth, and truth being the lodestar or North Star for the free people. So. And so you can watch what's happening in politics or in discussions. Like, what are they aiming for? Are they aiming for a power approach, or are they aiming for a truth approach? Right. Like what's happening even now in the United States or wherever else.
Right. And some would argue, well, many would argue that truth is relative, that each person or each family can find their own truth. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Last time we talked about Aristotle and the concept of virtue. That virtue, the pursuit of virtue, is actually the pursuit of happiness that we have enshrined in the U.S. Declaration of Independence. That man has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We talked more detail about that last time, so I'll let listeners to go back and re-listen to that episode. But the idea was that happiness is not just this, nice warm feeling inside of you. It's the pursuit of virtue, and virtue is doing the right thing at the right time to the right person in the right amount for the right reason, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now that might shift and change. If you're trying to get to the North Pole, and I'm trying to get there from southern Utah, and you're trying to get there from Lisbon, Portugal, your heading will be different, but your destination is the same.
And so the pursuit is going to have commonalities and common denominators.
Yes, but it may shift and look different depending on where people are coming from, the specific circumstances they're looking for. But what is the North Star? The North Star, is it virtue? And how is virtue defined? We talked about this last time as well, that Aristotle said there is a voice inside every human being, and it's the divine, or it's the most divine thing within. It's like, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to give it a name. He called it reason. And so within Western civilization, you go look at the court system, and they say that the standard of behavior is, what would a reasonable person do? So the jury is sitting there and they're judging their fellow, the person who's the defendant, and the judge, and they're asking, what would a reasonable person have done in that situation? Did they act reasonably? So there's this standard that we're talking about, that we can project ourselves into that situation that defendant was in, for example, using a courtroom as But there's this universal standard. That's how we have juries. For example, we're able to say, what should you have done? What should that person have done? So there's a should.
Right.
There's a should.
There's
And
a
now
bar. There's a standard.
There's a standard, and we can, given the knowledge of the circumstances, we can all. The idea is that a body of people, using again a jury as an example, a body of 12 people or of your peers can collectively determine what the should in that situation would have been, and where's that should coming from? That divine voice of reason. So there is. So if we turn away from that notion that there is a guide for all of us, then we're all shooting for different destinations. And that's where Western civilization will fail or have struggles, is if people are they have different North Stars. They listen to different voices, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. And I think that's a good lead into one of the topics I want to really address today is pursuing truth and pursuing a deep education in truth, studying out of the best books, across time and space, digging into the minds of the greatest thinkers and leaders of all times, and maybe, well, not maybe, into the greatest failures of all time, so that we have a deeper and broader understanding of truth. But I guess I want to wrestle with this because, at least in my experience, it's incredibly rare to find people who are very, very well read. Tough. And I guess one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is like why people do not pursue a deep education and a broad education. Not to be confused with getting many degrees. Like I don't even think that's on the table for a deep education of like, why I went to school forever and I've got this degree and then I got this degree and this degree. That's not what we're talking about. That's not even on the table for discussion. We're talking about pursuing on your own a deep and broad education.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I don't remember the Latin words, the difference between career and education. It's like curare and educare. I can't remember the Latin roots, but curare is like a racetrack. There's a right way to be a doctor. There's a best practice for being a doctor. There's a best practice standards for being an accountant, for being a pilot, for being a lawyer. You need to learn that and run that track, and you can improve the state of the art within that space. But that's very different from educare, which is this way of being, this way of participating in the large, bigger picture. And so I think that's where we've gone astray, is we think that education is career training, and that's an important part of it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing. And if we're taught that it is, then we're left as we're experts in one area and neophytes, fetuses in the art of freedom.
Yes. Wow. Even to the point where these areas where we have massive gaps and limited understanding, they actually put restrictions and limitations even on the things where we are, quote, experts. And by studying outward, it makes us better able to
connect.
Yes, we're connecting all these pieces, right? And you better understand your own thing.
Yeah. You can connect across disciplines. When you're multidisciplinary, educated, you can then connect across disciplines.
Exactly. Here's two examples that we've experienced. Studying all kinds of religions in depth and living among them has really profoundly helped me understand my own religion. Going and living in many countries and seeing how they live and operate has helped me understand and appreciate my own country. And it's that exposure to the others with an open mind and heart that sheds light and understanding to my own. Right? It was such a cool experience, and still is.
For sure. I think of you start out with the question like, how did this happen? Why is this happening? And I think of, again, going back to Aristotle, how every virtue has vice on both sides. There's one way to get it right and lots of ways to get it wrong. Every yin has a yang, and so there's opposition in all things. Every virtue has a vice, and it's like surrounded by. So every good thing can be taken to an extreme, Even the physical, for example, taking care of oneself physically could lead you to ignore other important things, relationships, spirituality, education. So you can do things. Keeping all those in a balance is the art of the free man. That is the liberal arts, is how do you do all of the things in the proper balance at the proper time. It's really, really hard. The art of the free man is the most difficult. For free man, formidable man, however you want to call it, it's like the most difficult thing to accomplish, right? And so when I think of,
and it fires me up. Even hearing you say that, I'm like, yes, let's do that.
Yes.
It's that iconic Renaissance man. We have this call to that, to do the hard thing of having it all.
I think this idea that every virtue has a vice. When I think of free enterprise capitalism, or just free enterprise, you think of Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations, which was a revolutionary. I think it was published in 1776. Revolutionized the world. This whole idea of division of labor, of specialization, where you had instead of learning how to do all of the things yourself, how to shoe a horse, how to grow your own food, how to make your own clothes, how to thatch your own roof, it's like you start to specialize, and all you do is you make pins, and you become an expert in making pins. And that's the example that he uses. And it has created the world that we live in, where we have so many goods and services so cheaply. It has raised our standard of living. It's fantastic. Love it. Would not go back. Is there a possible downside? Well, yes, it could be, if you think that's all that I have to do is specialize.
Right.
That's all there is to it. If I specialize, the rest will take care of itself, because other people are specializing in the other things that need to be done. Someone else is the fireman. Someone else is the sheriff. Someone else is the lawyer. Someone else is the accountant. Someone else is building the bridges. Someone else is running government. And so we get blinders on, and we think, I focus on this one thing. Everyone, and I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to be the best I can. I'm sure everyone else is being the best they can in their sphere of operation. And we don't learn that part of being a free man or woman is knowing that there are other responsibilities besides specialization. And the education model of the West, which came from Prussia, it was a mechanized factory model: create workers, train workers, use bells. So you do rote tasks. You are graded regularly on how you're doing. It's not a model for free people. It's a model for factory people. It's a model for specialization, and to do what you're told, and to do it well, and to get better and better at it. And so that to me, I think, is where we went awry. And other people, of course, have talked about this, but by seeing the virtue, specialization, division of labor is a virtue. It's a powerful technology, so to speak, a powerful idea, but it's not the only idea. And if left to its own, it will cause problems, because there are other aspects of life, of being a free person, that are necessary. And I think that's probably if we had to answer your question in one statement, it would be, we have been trained to think that specialization is all that there is, and our other duties are paying taxes, and then retiring, and being a consumer. So specialization, consumer, taxpayer, and maybe if you want to have a family, that's fine. Don't have to. If you want to, but those are the three things you have to do: is have a profession, consume, and then pay taxes. And that's all you have to do. And life that's it.
Right. And it becomes this very simplified, kind of a bare minimum existence. And I think a lot of it, without knowing, a lot of us just fit into that, and we just kind of do what needs to be done, and we're trying to be comfortable, and trying to be good people, and trying to live a good life, and we're rolling along doing our thing. But even as you're describing that, like, in my mind, and this is one of my biggest concerns, and one of the reasons why I just love the formidable family man movement, is because if you only do one or two things well, the other areas leave you underdeveloped and not, frankly, naive. And the naive are the most easily exploited.
Yes.
And where we lack understanding or competence, we can easily become victims. We can be taken advantage of in so many ways. And quite frankly, Gary, this is how I see it for myself. If I don't educate myself and I don't work on myself, I become a liability instead of an asset. And one of the greatest things I want in life is I want to be an asset to my family and to humanity. And the last thing I want to do in life is walk around being a liability.
Yeah.
Because I am underdeveloped and underexposed and undercultivated. And I'm not helping towards the solution. I'm being a part of the problem, even though I may not be aware of it.
Specialization, division of labor creates a situation where you can't know everything about everything. You can't even know a bit about everything. Like if the computer in my car goes awry, I have no idea how to fix that. And I'm super grateful that there's a mechanic that I can take to and hand over some green pieces of paper, and he returns my car to me all repaired. I'm so grateful that I can go to the airport and get on this aluminum tube. Don't have to think about it. I arrived safely. So does my stuff. It's amazing. It's a miracle. So that world is made possible by division of labor and specialization. But does that cover all domains of living? And it's when we think that it does that things start to go awry. Under the liberal arts, it said, well, and you said you're right about being taken advantage of. You mentioned, I don't know if you've seen videos where people will have like a hidden camera in a mechanic shop, and they'll have two customers come in and they'll say, you need to change out your headlight fluid more frequently. And just nodding like, yeah, headlight fluid.
Take care of that.
That's sure. That's so a free society must have a moral and virtuous people. And the founding generation of the United States talked about that a lot. Like this form of government was only established for a moral and virtuous people. Any other kind of people will go through, like a whale through a net. Like it's, parchment barriers. Like it can't do anything against people who are corrupt, people who cannot be trusted, people who are going to be dishonest to one another. A freedom framework doesn't work for that kind of a society. That's where you have to have power to counteract corruption. So you're right. Things we don't know about, things we're naive about, we can be taken advantage of. And as things get more and more specialized, there's more and more things we can be taken advantage of. And therefore, we want to have mechanisms to ensure that there's trustworthiness and, 5-star reviews on Google or whatever.
Let's go into that, brother. Let's go right there. That's a great segue into this question of you take a family man, you, me, the guys listening. We have jobs or careers or businesses. We have wives. We have children. We have maybe some civic responsibilities. Hopefully we have some hobbies and some adventures. Maybe we're contributing to the community somehow, or we're participating in church or other organizations, hopefully doing some philanthropy somewhere. So you're just taking a good guy. Let's take a minute and try to kind of paint a broad, this is a big question, but just kind of paint a somewhat of a target on what a deep education looks like, what it takes, and talk about why most people don't pursue it.
Yeah.
I guess when we start talking about what it is, we'll see why most people don't pursue it.
Yeah. Well, I think most people don't pursue it because they don't know it exists. I did not know it existed.
Exposure.
Lack of exposure. Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't know that it existed. I didn't know, I think most, at least American kids on the American side, it's, 3 branches of government, division of labor, division of powers. There's this very superficial, like, okay, there's no understanding of the deep human nature causes behind the structures of government.
Right.
For example. And so we're simply aware.
Or even the workings of life and humanity and civilization.
Yeah. Which is, again, going back to Aristotle from our last conversation, that you have that a complete life consists of virtue, which is right action, wisdom, which is a knowledge of things that don't change, judgment, a knowledge of things that do change. So you have to have that exposure and wisdom and understanding of human nature, of the physical world, of power dynamics, and proper role of government, proper role of family, proper role of business, proper role of church, proper role of media, proper role of, so all these different spheres. John Locke talked about this, there's these different institutions within a society, a free society, and they each have roles, and there's bounds they could step out of, but there's corruption that can enter into them. So to me, a whole education is going to be one that helps you understand what is man, what is the good life, why are we here, and not that you're necessarily going to answer these questions, but you're pursuing the answer to these questions. You are asking those questions. And then if you believe in the freedom, the liberal art freedom model, Western civilization, like that's the way to go, then you start studying it. So what is, like I said, the proper role of the major institutions of a free society, the church, the government, the community, the family, the business, the media, the arts, all these different elements. What is the proper role of them? How are they supposed to interact? Where can they be corrupted? What are the checks and balances that have to exist between them at different levels of society, city, community, county, state, federal, for example? What is the role between nations? Understanding all of that, I think is an initial, like, you got to start getting that framework. Because every single citizen in a free country, at least, has the ability to vote, to actually direct or assist in the direction with their fellow voters, what that country is supposed to do, what that government is supposed to do, what debt you're going to incur, what obligations you're going to put upon your unborn children. So these are big, long-term ideas and perspectives that you have to understand and be able to wrestle with. So when you go check that little box, every year or every 4 years or what have you, you're making wise decisions and not short-term decisions.
Wow. Okay. So where does one begin, and how do we fit it into our lives?
For me, I thought you might ask that question, so I pulled this book off my shelf. It's called The Great Conversation. To me, this is a great place to begin.
I was hoping we'd get to the great conversation or the great debate.
Yeah. So this question that you're asking is part of the great debate. That phrase you just used refers to this discussion that's been going on for millennia across all societies, particularly in the West, of trying to answer these very questions. So a number of years ago, 60, 70 years ago, you can see right there, if you're watching on my bookshelf, there's like 60 volume set you can go purchase of the greatest of those ideas, the great conversation. What have people, as they've wrestled with this? So to me, that is a great place to start. And the first book in that set is called The Great Conversation. It's a lot of these books are really hard to read. A lot of them were written a long time ago. They were written in other languages. They've been translated. Some of them are 2,000 years old or more. But The Great Conversation was written in English to the normal person. And it's a great place to start because it explains the dilemma that we're facing. And it explains it back in, was it 1942? They were raising the alarm 80 years ago, this is really a problem. We've deviated decades ago from the path of training people to maintain a free society, and we've got to get back on that path. So they were making that argument 80 years ago, that they had already deviated 20 or 30 years before that, or 40 years before that.
So you said 1842, you mean maybe 1942. Okay,
1940s.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, so the 1940s, they were saying 1890, 1900, somewhere in there, the education in the United States, at least in the West, to this.
Isn't that astounding and embarrassing? That where we are with so much advancement and so much technology, in many ways, the education is dismally underperforming. And we've lost so much ground. When I read biographies and autobiographies from the 1700s and 1800s, I'm just blown away of what these young men were expected to know.
Yeah, I did my graduate studies in education. As part of that program, I had to read The Education of James Madison, and it was unrecognizable. His educational path was unrecognizable to anything I'm familiar with in, at least in the public sector. Maybe there's people out there doing this to their kids with, in a private way with private tutors or something. But it was a completely different kind of education. So you're right. It wasn't an autobiography, but it was.
What years was he
James Madison was he was father of the Constitution.
Okay.
Of course, one of the early presidents. So he was
mid 1700s.
Mid 1700s
Yeah.
was when he was doing it. Yeah.
And the education of those men, even at the young ages, many of them came with young, and
Jefferson was learning Greek at like 6 or 9. Age 6 or 9. So that's that right there just sets it apart.
And his library is one of my most favorite exhibits anywhere. Seeing his library, something 6,000, 9,000 books, in order, kind of going through genre, and then in the languages he wanted to read, the best books ever written in the original language, and so he would learn that and then study it, right. And they were doing this, and they were making it happen. And so I think you're right. We start with maybe a gathering of books like the Harvard classics or the great books of the Western world, and start plugging through them. And some of them are quite difficult. Well, but even, my wife and I and our teenagers are going through a list of the great classics, and we're starting with the novels. They're amazing.
Very accessible.
Very accessible, and they're great stories. And they're page turners. You're like, this is so good, and it's just going. They almost always end tragically, constantly. Every time my kids are like we're so used to Disney endings, and I'm like, why are all the classics the sad ending? That's because they're teaching true principles. When we make those choices and we stick to them, there's no happy ending. This does not play out well. So even starting with the classic novels is a really excellent place to start, because you start understanding humanity.
Yeah. Story is very powerful. When you think of the great book series is not stories. So it's probably not a great place to start with young people. You want to start with stories, because stories, they draw us in, our empathy, we can put ourselves in those people's situations, but we can have conversations about what's happening in those stories. Like, what would you do? Why do you think they acted that way? What was the impact of that person's actions on the rest of the storyline and so you can already start to see the whole human nature, DNA, like what are we made of? Do I see that within myself? Under what circumstances would I have made the same decision? What do I have within me that could hurt the people that I love? So yeah, stories is a great place to start. And to get into the technical description, which is, not near, it's much harder, but it gets into it's much more packed. That's where you turn over to the great books of the Western world. That's where you would, so the nice little pairing there of those two sources.
Yeah. And alternated. My wife and I we've been doing this for years and years and years. I'm consistently reading 4 to 5 books at a time, usually different genres, so that I'm just progressively, and I can do it different times of day, or if I'm not feeling like do one or the other, but I'm progressively moving along through these great books. And I make it a part of, for me now it's daily. I make it a part of my daily rhythms and routines to do something to work on my education. Right. And I think that's a great way to fit it in. In fact, let's do that right now. Where do you fit it in? How do you fit this in your life?
Mornings or evenings. That's when I do it, depending on what else is going on. Like right now, I'm really focusing on the physical, because I let myself go for a little while. I need a little, Greg, finger wagging at me. So I'm doing a lot more in the mornings on that front than I normally would. But yeah, so there is typically a sacrifice of some sort involved, where you're giving up something. But going to something we talked about before the recording started, if you are focusing on the physical, it usually frees up the mental also. If the physical is dragged down, it wants more of your attention and energy. It wants more time dissipation. It wants, if you're taking care of the physical, there's often, you don't need the distraction as much that if you're in a lower physical state, you might I want to just watch shows. I just want to eat food. I just want to. If your physical is at a peak, then your mind is freed. There's still something left to give at the end of the day. When you've given all you could at work, you still have some time. And that's I think the struggle is, if you're in a situation where you're giving everything at work and you have fumes left over to give to your wife and kids and other pursuits, there isn't space for this. And so you have to find a way, how do I make it so that I'm not, that giving 100% at work isn't giving all that I have to give.
Like that was it. I went to work, there's nothing left. Man, you articulated that so well, Gary, that if our body, which is our vehicle, if the vehicle's off, it starts to pull away from other good things. And you're more tempted to do the lazy stuff. It seems like this Herculean effort to turn to a book instead of just plop down and do nothing.
Yes.
Watch a movie, right?
Yes.
Where if the body's in a great condition, well, and we could go even deeper and higher on this, the better condition the body's in, the better the brain performs. Performance level goes up, retention goes up, like cognitive processing goes up,
right?
Because we're eating well and we're exercising, so you have blood flow to the brain, you have the fuel, the brain is consuming up to even 20 to 30% of what we're consuming is feeding the brain. And if we're getting at good things, if we're getting ketones up to the brain functions. And what they found recently, Gary, you'll geek out about this. They found recently with people who have lowering cognitive abilities, they found if they gave them ketones and then retested them, within an hour, their cognitive performance improved. Within an hour.
That's game changer stuff.
Yeah. It's wild. So if you and I aren't sleeping well and we're not eating well, the brain's not functioning like it could. And so it makes even, we're sitting here talking about study and deep learning and you're like, bro, I'm having a hard time like reading the newspaper. Like we've got to get ourselves in a condition where we can pursue this. It's the holistic whole life approach.
And another piece that you want to be open to is, we talked about Aristotle and the divine voice within the reason, that, the whole idea there is that there is something outside of us that can prompt us, that can reveal to us, that can share with us the next thing that we should do, or a way that we can improve our relationships or something, in our life. And if you are empty at the end of the workday, you're not going to be thinking, what can I do for my wife? What can I do for my children? What is the next step for them? So like you said something on one of your recent podcasts where you said, my marriage is not 50-50. I'm going to take the heavier load. That was so impactful for me. It's like, that's a whole nother level of being a husband, where it's like, I'm looking for a chance to deprive my wife of being able to give 50% because I'm always going to be I'm going to do that hard thing. I'm going to take that hard thing. Now, what is the impact on her? You could give a whole nother, get Rachel on and have a whole nother conversation. What does it do to a wife when a husband is constantly saying, I'm going to take that from you. I'm going to take that from you. That's mine. I've got that. What does that free her up? What reason, what divine, what thoughts can then be coming to her as to what she can do with her world, That's a whole nother place then. I come home from work and the whole rest of the world better be ordered to serve me because I just finished what is service. My work is my service. Now the world needs to, the rest of the job of the rest of the world, or people in my life, is to serve me because I did my part. That's a very different place than what you described in that episode of, that was one thing I do. Yes, the work thing. But when I'm finished with it, I now have an opportunity to look around and say, what can I now do?
Yes.
Take those to lift, the burdens of others.
Yes. And okay, I'm kind of geeking out here, brother, because you just articulated something so beautifully, the exact same thing I talked about with the previous guest who spent almost 20 years as a Navy SEAL, right? And he said on the SEAL teams, this guy was going all over the world running these missions. He said on the SEAL teams, they have this saying of find work. Like your job as a team, you go and you don't wait to be told what to do. You find work. You walk in somewhere, you find work. You find you're going he does that, you're finding work, right? And he says he brought home the same philosophy. He's like, I get home at the end of the workday, I open the door, I go looking for work. I'm finding work. And it's that same thing you were just describing. It's like, we can't come home and then expect the whole family to get out of our way, to do everything for us, to have everything just right. And unfortunately, many men come home and they just come home angry and upset and yelling and belittling and insulting because of what you were describing so well. And it's like, no, let's take the opposite. Let's come home ready to do some heavy lifting.
I think it's the parable of the talents in the New Testament, where I never thought, it was only recently in the last couple of years that I looked at the parable of the talents this way, that in the parable of the talents, you have people with differing levels of skill and ability or possession or resource. That wasn't the issue. The issue is what they do with it.
Yep.
Did they find work to put that talent to? And then do it, and it multiplied as a result of that. In the case of what you're talking about, the relationship with your wife multiplies, the relationship with your children multiplies, the relationship with your community multiplies, your relationship your physical multiplies. And so I don't know how much the parable talks about going and finding the work. I think there's other places you can find in the New Testament and other scripture of that part of it. But the whole point of that parable is you're supposed to find work for the resource that you've been given to multiply. And if you don't, you've hidden it under a bushel and you're cast out. It didn't matter if you had 1, 2, or 4, or 10 to start with. It mattered what work you found to do with it.
Exactly.
That the steward, not the steward, but I can't remember the term for the talent giver.
Yeah.
That's what he judged the individual stewards on. It wasn't starting amount and the ending. It was what work did you find?
What did they do with what they had? Exactly.
What did they do with what they had?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. This is so good. Okay, so for those of you who are listening, the invitation here is, and this can seem overwhelming, right? Even listening to Gary talk about all the understanding all the things, I'm sitting here like, oh man, that's so much. It can be so overwhelming. Which, okay, bring it on. Like, face it like a man. I don't know. I get all fired up. Like, yeah. So what? It's a big deal. Like, bring it on. What are you gonna do? Play small. Like, let's go.
You play small. Let me play off of the play small idea. Chess. If you've never played chess before and you're sitting across from a chess master, you're toast. He will smoke you. He knows every possible move you can make and every counter move to that move. And you're like, how about this? It's like, boom, just like, so you don't want that to be your life. There's certain areas of your life where you need to. There's certain areas of your life where you can't not know chess. Now, flying an airplane, I don't need to know that chess game. That in the life that I've chosen, I'm so glad there's others who play that game, who know that game so well, no matter what weather, no matter what happens to the airplane, no matter what they know how to play the game of chess in the air. With my car computer, there's a guy who knows all the different all the moves in that game, and he knows how to deal with it. Love it. What areas of my life do I need to know how to play chess?
This is it.
Marriage, child rearing, profession, and the art of freedom. So for example, here, and you'll see this all the time. In the United States right now, we're having quite an interesting situation with having just elected a new president who is doing things that prior presidents haven't done and trying to reduce the power of the executive rather than expand it, which is kind of novel. That's not normally what's happened. What I was listening to a fascinating conversation between Joe Rogan. Some people might know who he is, but probably the leading podcaster in the United States, the most listened to
in the world,
and
by far
in the world. Yeah, in the world. And he was having a conversation with Dr. Brett Weinstein, another brilliant evolutionary biologist who also has his own podcast. And
his podcast is revolutionary.
Yeah,
Rachel and I listened to his. I didn't know he was on Rogan's show.
Yeah, so cool. You get these people together and just these awesome conversations, and they're both so widely they have so much exposure and so much education, and there's just so much insight. So it was brilliant listening to them, but it was fascinating to listen to their conversation about like Elon Musk, for example. And this is a current event, happening in the United States, where Elon Musk is the head of DOGE, I think is how it's pronounced, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, and he's going through and he's trying to find all the ways that government's being inefficient and corrupt and expose it to the world and blah, blah, blah. And the conversation that Joe Rogan was having with Brett Weinstein Brett Weinstein's the one who made this point. He's like, this is really good. I'm so glad this is happening. And he's like a self-described radical progressive. But he's saying, yeah, government needs to be efficient. Government needs to be not corrupt. And he said, but the thing we have to watch out for is there's a lot of good things that the government is doing. We want to make sure that those things don't get stopped. So there's this delicate balance that we have to do to make sure that the good things are still done but the corrupt things are not done. And I was listening there. I'm like, Doctor, what, Brett, have you never read the Federalist Papers? Have you never read John Locke? The things that you think the government should do, they said the government should not be doing at all. So
interesting.
He hasn't learned, in my humble opinion, is that he hasn't learned to play that game of chess. He still thinks, because it is through the vehicle of the good things that government has tried to do over the last 100 years in the United States that the corruptions were introduced. Those good things, those good intentions were the vehicle. They were the delivery mechanism for the corruption that Elon Musk and Donald Trump, are purportedly trying to. So it's like you are leaving the virus carrier in place. History will simply repeat itself.
Because on the surface it looks like a good thing.
Because on the surface it looks like a good thing. But it violates, at least, the founding principle, what the founders of the United States said that the proper role of government was. And I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but they read Locke, in particular John Locke, and it was that they came to the determination that power, force, which is government, that's what government is, should only be used for the protection of life, liberty, and property. It cannot be used for any other good thing. All other good things, which like what? So all other good things must be done through persuasion, consent, cooperation, competition, but never coercion. That's Federalist End.
You put it into the private sector, and it'll be done so effectively, right? You introduce that little bit of competition, and things get done well, and usually cheap. Like you're saving money and getting more bang for the buck.
Yeah, and he did talk about that. He did talk about the private sector, that the market is a much better mechanism for accomplishing a lot of things. But he said there's a lot of things that the market is not good at, and he's right about that too. But that doesn't mean government should do it. That's what charities are for, and churches, and
that's what I was going to say. So
and nonprofits. Yeah. But in order for those things to thrive, what kind of a populace do you have to have? What kind of a populace seeks to found and run nonprofits? What kind of a populace seeks and runs churches and all the hard work that has to happen in a church? What kind of populace looks after his neighbor, looks out to see who needs to be fed, clothed, housed, healed? What kind of a populace does that? It's not a populace who's only thinking about their job and wants, my profession, my taxes, and my consumerism. That's not the kind of populace that's going to go and solve the problems of society on their own without the coercive power of government. So that conversation between Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein, which is probably listened to by millions of people, there was a chessboard happening inside that podcast, and they were moving a piece of, we still want this move to happen, but that move is a carrier for the very thing that they're so glad that it's being eradicated, or hopefully being eradicated.
So
right now.
Man, there's so much going on in my head and so many places, but let's kind of zero in on understanding the chessboard of freedom.
It's three-dimensional, by the way. It's like this really complicated chessboard.
Expound on that.
Oh, it's a three-dimensional, meaning that it's not just chess. It's three-dimensional chess. It's this crazy difficult, to understand all the proper moves. You have to study a lot to know what happens if you move this piece. Well, you got to watch out, because 3 moves down, that piece up there is going to be able to move in here. That's what I meant. It's just a super complicated game. Freedom is a super complicated game, especially governance of a free people.
And that's where I wanted to go. Right. And that's where I wanted to go with this question and conversation for a minute. What does that look like? Where do we start reading? Where do we start studying? If we want to understand the chessboard, so to speak, we're going with this metaphor of freedom, where do we go? My first thought is, we have to learn individual freedom. We have to keep ourselves free, because if I'm not a free man myself, I can't even participate in in societal freedoms and civilizations because I'm a slave to my own vices, my own addictions, my own problems are such an obstacle. I can't even get down the runway because it's so cluttered and covered with crap. I'm a slave. And my thought is it starts there with understanding yourself and understanding what it means to be a sovereign, independent, free man. But then I'd love to hear give me specific books, authors. Let's go there. Let's dig into, if I want to understand or begin to understand that chessboard of freedom, what do I do?
Yeah. You okay if I share a slide?
Please.
So I gave a speech last September. It was Constitution Month in the United States. So I was invited to give a speech on the Constitution, and I made this slide for it. And this is basically this is the model that I think answers the question that you just asked. This is the model for a free, and I apologize to those who are just listening. I'll try to describe it if you're not being able to see this, but there's the question of what is done by force and what is done by persuasion, cooperation, consent, compassion, and competition. Under a free model, the state, which is force, takes care of defense of life, liberty, and property, and nothing else. So everything else.
And when you say, can I interject there and ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you say state, are you referring to a state in the United States? So it's more of a local government?
I'm talking about anyone with a gun. Anyone who with a gun and a license to use it against you if you don't act in accordance with the law.
Wow. Now I like that. If it's an educated, moral populace.
Yeah. That's why you have to have an educated, moral populace.
Okay, so the state in this case could be an individual, a community saying, you know what, we are going to defend by force life, liberty, and property.
Yeah. Now there's a whole lot we could talk about of what is life, what is liberty, what is property. Those are big questions. But
give me some books real quick. Like
John Locke is the book on this. John Locke, the second treatise on concerning government, is the book on that. There you go. Yeah. So in his hypothesis, or his, what he presented was that force. I don't know how deep to go in this because I'm not even getting to the actual question that you.
Yeah, don't go deep. Don't go deep. Just don't go deep. Just keep going.
So his position that was if you want, power is always a problem, but you have to have power. Power, you can't not have power because there are people who make bad choices. There are people who try to incur upon your life, liberty, and property, and we can't all be spending all of our days defending ourselves. Therefore, we need to pool our resources and hire a sheriff who goes around and protects, life, liberty, and property, and have a jury system and a judge, judges and all that kind of stuff. So again, we could really go into depth there, but force is...
One thought on that.
Yeah.
You're right. In an ideal scenario, we do have people there to protect and save us, but we're very quickly finding that there's going to be so many scenarios where nobody's coming to save you.
Yes.
Nobody's coming to rescue you. Nope. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you know about this, Gary. We started hosting what we call an asset training here at our place in Portugal. And it's a treat where we come in and we bring in specialists and we train people in real life, gritty self-defense, protection, escape, evasion, and medical, emergency medical response, right? In this scenario, it's like, hey, you're in an austere environment, or there's a natural disaster, or no one's coming to save you. Can you defend yourself? And can you help, the wounded, the sick, the bleeding? Can you take care of yourself? Are you an asset to your family and the community? And are you formidable? Because it's a very real thing. It's a harsh reality that we don't want to face and we don't want to accept. And we wish we lived in this ideal world that if I can make a phone call and within moments, someone's there to protect me and save me.
Yeah.
But I just don't see that being realistic.
Absolutely. So John Locke in the second treatise, he starts talking about this thing called the state of nature, where there is no law, there is no government, there is no state. Everyone has to defend ourselves from each other. If anyone comes against you, it's just you against them. And one of the criticisms of Locke's like, that's never existed. There's always been some form of government, but it's like, no, it exists anytime you're in a dark alleyway where somebody wants to mug you. That's a state of nature.
There's no government. Yeah,
there's no government there to. It's
the
just
police
you.
station's around the corner. There's a firefighter, but who cares? For all intents and purposes, in that alley, it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So state of nature exists. I mean, the playground in middle school is a state of nature.
Because you're right. There's authority, and there are authority figures, and there's somebody that could help, but they're inside the building or they're around the corner.
Yeah. So that state of nature always exists in pockets around us, and quite a bit. We don't really think about it. If you live in a good society where people are generally kind to each other, you never really think about it. But there's other places where women have to carry mace, or they have to carry guns in their purses or whatever. It's because it's not so safe, and they recognize intuitively that I can be placed into a state of nature at any moment. I have to do something to protect myself. So again, rabbit hole. We could totally go down a rabbit hole.
Here's another one. I just want to share this real quick because it's fascinating on your point there. I'm coming up on somewhere, I don't know, around 70 countries that I've traveled to. And I'm not talking like tourism. We've traveled. And it is fascinating to me to see how culturally some places are so safe and so good. There's hardly any crime, hardly any violence. And your kids can just walk around and play and nobody's having to worry. It's amazing.
And that's normal. That's normal.
Yeah, it is their normal, and it has been for a long time. And then you go to, you fly over to this other country, or you go across a couple borders, and man, you're watching everything and everyone. If you turn your back for a second, they will rob you blind, take your kids, they'll beat you down. It is wild.
And that's normal.
And that's their normal. And it's cultural.
Yes. Yes.
It's okay. We can go down that rabbit hole, but it's a fascinating thing to see. It's like not all humans are the same, and not all cultures are the same.
Yeah, the spectrum of human behavioral possibility is, I don't think we can even fathom how. And Aristotle talks about this: how man can be a beast. How some cultures even it creates beasts.
Yes, exactly.
And beasts are normal, whereas other cultures create something closer to angels, and angelic behavior is more normal. And there's this wide range of possibility, as far as, and that's cultural, let alone the individuals within that culture. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. Here.
Yeah, so his idea was that, for a free society, he was living under divine right of kings, John Locke was. So he was living under a power structure, and he was trying to envision a free society. So his first treatise was refuting the divine right of kings and saying, that's wrong because of this, this, and this. And his second treatise was, here's what it should be. And power needs to be constrained because you can't live in anarchy. There are those who need to be protected. It's inefficient for us to be protecting ourselves all the time. We have a right to defend ourselves and our property and our loved ones. Therefore, we can delegate that right to a sheriff to take care of that for us. We can focus on higher order things, like a profession that we love, like gardening or whatever it is that we want to do. We don't want to be spending all of our time with a pitchfork in one hand and a gun in the other. It's like, no, that's not an optimal way to live. So you constrain government to only the defense of life, liberty, and property. What about everything else that needs to be done in society? Well, you have to have a people who are capable and wanting to take care of all of society's other problems.
Yes.
But what kind of a people is
I got to drive that home. You got to want it, and you got to be capable of it.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yes. So in the founding generation time, this was called private virtue. They differentiated between private virtue and public virtue. You can go read this in their writings. That's what they're talking about. Private virtue is the thing that you were talking about at the beginning when I first, right before I shared the slide, which is you have to have people of virtue, wisdom, judgment, and property. That's Aristotle's complete life. That's happiness. Happiness is really just virtue, which is doing the right thing, the right time, right person, right reason, right length. So they're listening to the divine voice within. They're acting in a reasonable way to do what's right in whatever circumstance, regardless of how poor they are, how rich they are. They're being generous. They're being magnanimous. They're being courageous. They're all the virtues Aristotle talks about. And you can get this all from the New Testament and other scriptural sources as well. Like, how are you supposed to live? What does virtue mean? But you need to have a people, a majority who are virtuous, are wise, are people of sound judgment, and they have property, meaning they're able to live independently. They're not dependent on others, and they can use that property to provide for their own and for others around them. So that's happiness.
Man, that's important.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware there are big pushes from higher places to remove property. And they're really selling that. There's a lot of people in Europe that are just, pushing that agenda of like, you don't need to own anything ever. Nobody needs to own a car. Nobody needs to own a house, or just, it's just, well, let's take property away. So I love hearing you, expound on that and put that into context here. He's saying like that has to be one of the critical elements.
And it's a chess move. Someone's going to own it. Someone is going to own it. Ownership means control. Whoever owns the thing has control over the thing. Now, they might be preaching a gospel of we're all going to use the things, but whoever owns it controls it.
Has the power. Exactly.
Has the power. And so are the people who have that power and that property, people of virtue, wisdom, and judgment, as you now you sign over all property to those individuals. What does power do? It corrupts. What does absolute power do? Corrupts absolutely. What did Lord Acton, who say that? I think I shared this with you last time. What did Lord Acton say about, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely? The next thing he said was, almost all great men are bad, whether they are in power or influencing, holding the puppet strings of those in power. So somebody's got to have that property, which gives them control. That's the definition of power. So what you're saying is we want to centralize power. By centralizing property, you're centralizing power.
Terrible idea.
Terrible idea. Now, does property ownership, are there a lot of headaches entailed in property ownership? Yes.
Yes.
It's a lot of work, but it does something to us to be a steward.
To be autonomous.
And so there's stewardship and there's autonomy. And those two principles are things we should go and study and have another 2-hour conversation about just those two things. Like, what does autonomy do? What does stewardship teach? What does stewardship do to our children when they have jobs? That dog is going to die if you don't feed it. That calf, that lamb is going to pass away if you don't go out and take care of your stewardship. So property is necessary to happiness and virtue. So
I love that.
Yeah, that top line.
I got to share one cool image. We were traveling as a family up through Scandinavia and went through some museum up there in the Viking era, and it had this Viking dress and a sword, and it did this whole presentation on the sword. And the people that were carrying swords in this time period in this place were the landowners. And it's like these were the ones who owned the land. They had the property and they carried the sword, and the sword was the mark of a landowner. And man, how that fits in this discussion.
Yeah.
The
absolutely.
guy with the sword is the landowner. He's the one that controls it and has the power.
And defends the attempts against his property.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
Because the whole idea of the freedom model is that it's all about us as individuals growing individually and solving society's problems. And so you've got to be this kind of a person. It's not about there's these other entities that are going to solve all of society's problems for us, because when you say it's other people's jobs, you're giving them power, which will then centralize and then corrupt. So it's got to be, and so there will be institutions. We can get to that in a minute. But the first layer is private virtue must exist of people of virtue, wisdom, judgment, and property. That's happiness. Just being that creates the happiness. It's like, okay, well, what's beyond that? Those people, we talked about this a little last time. We talked about friendships of virtue, that friendships of virtue combine to solve the needs of their community, because that brings meaning, purpose, connection, impact. That's where the meaning of life. If I don't know how many people watched Hamilton, the Broadway play, but Mrs. Hamilton, at the end of that play, she sings about her husband's life, who died in a duel. Then she sings about her life and what she did with her life. And what was she most proud of? This orphanage that she started in New York City. And she sings about the orphanage, and she sings about the hundreds of children that she's helped. That orphanage is still around today. 200 years later, that orphanage still exists and is still serving. What a legacy. Think of the the children that have been fed, clothed, housed, healed, educated from this one woman with like two others. I think they got together and like, boom, we're gonna create an orphanage. And 200 years later, that one institution is solving those problems to this day. That is like the perfect example of this model that I think you see in Christianity. I think you see in Stoicism, in Greek Stoicism. So the idea is these people who have worked, probably for over decades to gain the character, wisdom, judgment, property, they then are going to associate with others to do whatever that divine voice calls them to do. It might be to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, house the homeless, heal the sick, educate the ignorant, liberate the captive, create beauty, create businesses that do these and other things. So you're associating and you're doing this through persuasion, cooperation, consent, compassion, and competition, not power. So power is off to the side, protecting life, liberty, and property. Everything else is done through consent, through discussion, through persuasion, through, I will join forces with you. Let's do this. And that's where you get the meaning, purpose, connection, and impact that so many people seem to be missing in life. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from self-service. It comes from serving others. And so that's public virtue. So we talked about private virtue. If you go read their writings, they talk about this thing called public virtue, which is where you're now outside of your sphere of influence is expanded beyond just your own well-being, and you're now concerned about the well-being of others. And that's where you see the innovation, you see independence. And if one of those institutions gets corrupted, if that orphanage becomes corrupt and there's a leader in there who's abusing the children or misusing the funds, those who are donating can withdraw their support. That there's probably some laws that were violated, and those can be looked at as well. But it's the same analogy, and I think I shared this analogy with you last time too. Is that it's the same analogy of the watertight doors on a ship, where you have all these little pockets of society that are doing their element of good, and if one of them goes bad, it doesn't corrupt the whole body politic, the whole populace. If that makes sense. Whereas if everything's being done by government, it puts, and that's one of the people who I see expressing angst and frustration with the changes happening right now in the United States are those who are saying, but by doing that, by getting rid of the $1,800 coffee cup, which I think is one of the things they found, that there was some government department was spending $1,800 per coffee cup, you're also going to get rid of this other thing that I think is good. It's like, great, let's separate those. They never should have been together in the first place. But you put them all over in the force category. I wonder if I have a slide for that one. I think this is what.
And by the way, listeners, I'll put images of these slides inside the show notes. If you can't watch the video, you can at least look at the notes and see what we're talking about here.
Where this goes, if you think, and this again, the chess pieces are, if you think that it's very tempting because of the whole idea of division of labor, of specialization, let's let force. And this is the whole theory behind progressivism, by the way. Progressivism wasn't about corrupting government. It was about using taxation to do good within a society. Let's use taxation to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, house the homeless, heal the sick, educate the ignorant, liberate the captive, and create beauty. Let's use the power of taxation to do that. That's basically the mechanism. That's basically the thinking behind the progressive movement. Woodrow Wilson, others, in the turn of the last century, back in like the early 1900s, that's what they said. Let's expand the use of force beyond life, liberty, and property to also include these other really noble purposes. The problem, though, is it transitions. We're no longer needed. The populace is no longer needed to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, house the homeless, etc. And so our focus is on occupation, hobby, and hedonism. We become unbalanced, distracted, disconnected, isolated, lonely, addicted, angry, and we stagnate. Because the private and public virtue are the very lifeblood that makes life worth living.
With society,
yes. And so when you remove that, you just start to diminish. The people start to diminish.
This is so awesome, and it's hitting home so hard with so many different ways. When the Roman Empire was coming down, the whole idea of bread and circuses, right? And Juvenal calling bread and circuses, like just offer the populace cheap entertainment and cheap food, and they'll become docile and they'll forget public duty, right? And I love this connection here. It's like if we're just entertained and we're fed and like, hey, what do I have to worry about? I'm I go my job, I pay my taxes, I take care of my family, I do my thing. Like, what else? Yeah. And that's where it stops. And it leads to all those other things you just had on that slide there and you were talking about. And it goes away from ownership and responsibility and a moral obligation to be an asset, to do good, to make a difference. So I love the idea of individual responsibility and family responsibility. That for me, I have to become a well-developed, well-read, capable man, and then lead my family by example into becoming well-read, well-developed, capable people who are assets, and your family and the other families. So then it's like your ship, right? Yeah. With the watertight doors and segments, it's families. They come together to do good and become this great force for good, but each family is leading these efforts to be virtuous people, good people, capable, competent, confident people. Yeah. And that's how we make some real good happen.
Yeah. You could ask the question, well, where do we go from, how do we return to a model like this? What one possible critique of what's happening in the United States right now is, as you remove these layers of government that are doing X, Y, and Z, whatever those happen to be, if there are some good things in there that are no longer going to get done, who should do them? And is the populace? So right now, force is being used to stop doing those things because it's within the executive branch. And so the executive, who is the leader of that branch, has that ability to change how things are executed. And so progressivism is what gave, centralized all that power to that place. And it's actually being now used against those who are progressively minded. It's like you gave him the power to do the things you don't like. The things you don't like that he's doing right now, you gave him that power. That's the problem with the centralization of power. So, but the problem with what's happening there, or a problem, is that who's going to pick up that slack? Do we have a populace that will go in and feed? If there's hunger, they're not going to get fed now. If there's homes that are not going to be built, if there's healing that needs to be done, are we of the kind of people who are going to reach into that void, reach in and breach that gap? Or are there people that are going to suffer because those services are no longer being provided in the way that we've all gotten used to? Our normal is that someone else takes care of those things. So if we're trying to, it's not. But if that administration is saying, I want a new normal, what has to change? Are those actions actually changing us individually as citizens to step into that gap and solve those problems ourselves? So that's the struggle.
I hope so. And I
hope so too, but
I hope the people listening that it stirs them up, because this group and the people who are listening here, caliber of, at least the invitation and the challenge is, be the caliber of man that leads people to fill those voids.
Yes.
Let's put it back in the responsibility of individuals and families and communities. And if you're listening to this, like, answer this call.
Yes.
To step in and fill the void, be an asset.
Because there will be a void. You started out this conversation by asking about suffering. There's a great deal of suffering. It's possible that suffering is going to increase as certain programs are deemed as certain. There might be good things that were happening the wrong way, but they were still of benefit to someone, and they're not going to happen anymore. Will you look for that and step into that space? Do we have, we talked about being the asset. Are we right now that asset, or is it like, oh my gosh, I should have started two decades ago.
Exactly.
I'm not ready to be that asset. Here's an opportunity. I'm not ready for it. Hopefully we are.
Ooh. And the challenge there is to get ourselves prepared as quickly as possible and prepare our children. And in that, you were saying something quite a while ago that it made me think, it's like, we can have huge hearts and big wallets and bank accounts, but we can actually help in a way that hurts. And so we have to have wisdom with
and
compassion.
Judgment. Yeah.
And judgment. Exactly.
That's the whole definition of virtue, is doing the right thing in the right way. at the right time, to the right people, for the right length, for the right reason. That it's a triangulation of all these different factors that is very difficult. And Aristotle called it difficult in the extreme. So this is not a passive thing that you're advocating, Greg.
Right, exactly.
It's not this like, oh, no problem, let's all go do this. Like, no,
I'll take that over the weekend and solve this problem.
Yeah. No, it is a lifelong pursuit. But it is, I don't know of any other solution because the alternative is that power will fill the void. If people are not feeding hungry, if people are not healing the sick, if people are not housing the homeless, someone is going to demand that someone do something about it. And there's going to be a politician who says, I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll increase your taxes and I'll take care of that problem for you. We love that. I'm talking about America maybe specifically, but we love to have somebody else say, I'll take care of the problem. Just let me increase your taxes a little bit.
Yeah. We all love that. We're like, hey, let somebody else take care of it. And the invitation is let's take back more responsibility. I love it.
I think go ahead.
There's so much here. We can keep going. Let's kind of just wrap up right here. Maybe we can do this again another time. There's always so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts here, brother, and I would say invitations for action steps. So we can, hopefully those who are listening, you just felt inspired and stirred, maybe a little confused, maybe a little overwhelmed, maybe challenged, and all those things. But what are some concrete actions we can start doing right away?
So taking care of the physical is one. Find people who know how to solve. So Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, any business people out there, he's a great resource, strategic coach. Yep. One of his principles is who, not how. You don't have to know how to solve all the problems. Someone out there has likely already solved the problem you're trying to solve, like getting into shape. There are lots of people who can help you with diet, lots of people who can help you with your physical training. So don't try to be like, I'm going to go and individually research this and I'm going to invent something that someone's already invented. Go hire those people to help you, in that. So taking care of the physical is one. Starting to read, starting to discuss, it is really the other. I was thinking, if I've got the math right, every citizen in the United States, man, woman, and child, has a secret credit card that they don't know about, that the government makes charges to every time that they incur some kind of service, or that they do something that they think that we want, or that somebody thinks that they want. The unfunded liabilities of the United States come up to something like $650,000 for every man, woman, and child sitting on this little credit card that doesn't show up on your credit report, doesn't show up on your bank account, but that's the per person, per capita cost of this chess game being played in the United States for the last 100 years. It amounts to about $650,000 per American. As soon as you're born, you're handed this credit card. You are now, and you might pass it on to your children, and it's only growing. So that when we think about, that's
the debt liability per person.
That's the unfunded. That's not even the debt. That's actually the unfunded liability. It's all the promises that the U.S. government has made, like in perpetuity, will provide this. It comes to about, if I got the math right, about $650,000 per person. So there is a cost to playing the chess game wrong. There is a cost to allowing others, to just saying, putting on the blinders and saying, my only job is my job, and I'm not responsible for these other things. There is a little bean counter that's going and adding to this total. And maybe that's a helpful thing to keep in mind. It's like, I need to reverse that. That is catastrophic. And what will eventually happen is there's going to be a generation of Americans, and it might be the one right now, who say, help me out. You see young people are like, I don't want to buy a house. I can't buy a house. What's the point of me getting an education? The cost to get an education is astronomical. I'll be in debt for 30 years. So it's like, I'm going to opt out. And we're starting to see a generation that are acting unlike the prior generation, is saying, this social contract, I don't want to sign. You all are putting upon me a burden that I didn't ask for. I didn't sign any of these checks. I didn't purchase any of this. And you bought stuff on credit, and you're saying that I have to buy it. That's what we have done for the last 100 years. So there's a warning. That's a warning to us, to this current generation, those who are adults right now, that's the reality that we're asking these young people who are growing up as they face, here's your $650,000 bill. Welcome to adulthood. It's not even adulthood. It's at infancy that you receive it. So what do? Awaken to this situation. Be aware that this is the reality. Just because there's no pay, you don't see payments coming due on that $650,000. It's paid. I don't know if it'll ever be paid off, but we incur costs in the form of inflation, where your dollar,
Right.
if you look at what was a dollar worth 100 years ago versus what will it buy now, it's just like plummeted. So inflation is a quiet thief. I think it's a crime against humanity, quite honestly, because there's no incentive to save because your dollar simply reduces in value. So that's another one of the costs. So being aware of this is the reality that I'm living in, and it's perfectly orchestrated to make me think that all is well, and I can just have my job, just have my hobbies, just have my retirement off in the future, but I don't have to deal with any of these other aspects. So awaken would be the first thing. Taking care of yourself physically gives you the mental space to even deal with anything beyond your job.
Yes.
And then you can start looking at, okay, what part of society am I going to help solve?
Love it. Yeah. Pick a problem and start researching and start preparing and training to become an asset, to be a part of the solution. Gary, I love that. Love that, brother. Okay. Well, thanks again, my friend. It's always so good to talk to you and overwhelming to think through. It's there's so many problems in the world. And I know other people feel this way too. It's there's so many problems. Where I can always come back to for me, and maybe this helpful for others, is I know I can take care of me and I can take care of my family. And then together we can be a part of the solution, and we can start helping the people around us, and just maybe individuals at first. And then we can increase our circle of influence, but pull back in, get yourself right, get your family right, and start being a great force for good in the world.
And maybe I was a little gloom and doom what I ended with. Maybe I should end on a positive note.
It's a reality check.
But when I think of the example of the founding of the United States, I know I've referenced it, but they had a lot of really good ideas back. A lot of brilliant people got it right. The credit of the United States was in shambles at the end of the War for Independence. We're talking about the late 1770s, in shambles. Within not even a decade, the credit score of the United States had soared because they had put in place the Constitution and other proper structures that gave the rest of the world confidence again that they had lost. It gave them confidence. Okay, these people are serious. They're responsible. We can actually trust them to pay us back and I can't remember who it was Jefferson or Adams said it would have been unthinkable 6 years ago that 6 years from then our credit on the world stage would be at the level that it is now, because it was ridiculous just 6 years ago. So significant change can happen. Healing can happen. The ability to heal is within us all. This model that Aristotle articulated 2,300 years ago, it hasn't changed because it's human nature. Virtue, wisdom, judgment, property. That we all can pursue that starting today if we've been slacking at it. And as we do that in more and more people, we can solve these problems.
Yes. That, sir, is the positive note to end on.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. We can bring about massive change if we'll just get off the couch and do something about it. I love that. Thanks, brother. You're the man. Appreciate you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.